Hello everyone and welcome to a special webinar for International Women's Day from This Girl Blocks. I have got together some amazing ladies tonight to talk about imposter syndrome. We have Mia Giselbach all the way from Switzerland, is that right? You're working in Switzerland,
Yeah,
Mia?
it's right. I work
I've
in Geneva.
Okay, and we have Sarah Saxena, who's currently in Belgium. These ladies are quite literally world experts on this topic. We have me, obviously, and we also have Kavita Kemlani coming in from the Netherlands to join our panel discussion at the end. So, without further ado, I'm just going to hand over to these ladies because they're incredible and they know more about this than me. So, ladies, the floor is over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. So today we'll talk a little bit about imposter syndrome and more precisely imposter syndrome in anesthesiology. And firstly, I would like to allow Mia to give us a little bit more of some feedback regarding imposter syndrome.
Okay. So, yeah. So first, we wanted to talk a bit about sustainable development goals because those goals are have been set in 2015 by the UN. They were all the countries that are participating in the UN accepted unequivocally the goals, and one of them is gender equality. So gender equality means giving everybody the same chances, basically. But we want to make a bit of a difference with gender equity, which is recognizing that some people need actually more to attain the same goals and the same outcomes as other people. And what we advocate a bit is that because of imposter syndrome, as an instance, we women are basically need more than some of the men. So imposter syndrome, what is it? So imposter syndrome is to put a bit back into perspective, it's an inability to internalize successes and the fact that people think that it's actually because of luck or because of errors that they have successes in their everyday life. This syndrome was first described by Clance and Imes in 1978, and it was actually described in high-achieving women. It was a cohort of women that they studied, and they saw that imposter syndrome was setting them back in their career. So now we're going to talk a bit about imposter syndrome characteristic. Like what does it bring? So the people that are experiencing it can have a problem of accepting recognition from the others. They also tend to compare themselves to others. They have an increased fear of failure in their everyday life, in their tasks. They are often overworking. They are often also self-sabotaging and undervaluing their own successes. And these individuals are likely to be to have self-doubt and to have a low self-esteem. So there are different types of imposter syndrome described in the literature. First, there is the perfectionist. He always believes that he could have done better, and in this regard he feels like an imposter with his own work. Then there's also the experts, which always want to learn more, and for instance he's an expert in his own field, and he feels like he has to constantly keep on to not be exposed as a fraud. And then there's the natural genius, which is a to be talented to get somewhere in life, and that if you have to work, then you're a fraud, basically. There's also the soloist, which works alone because he feels like when he asks for help, it shows that he's a fraud. And then there's also the superhero, which believes he's incompetent and feels inadequate. So he's always searching for more. So this table it's taken from Hutchin and Rainbolt, which did something in 2016. And it was to show you which kind of incident in everyday life can result in imposter thoughts of our feelings. For instance, when there is a question of expertise from colleagues, from self, or from students, this results in doubting or lacking confidence in your own expertise. Then there are the ones that experience success and they question their professional legitimacy and they feel like frauds. There's also the comparison with or among colleagues, which can lead to distorted comparison to colleagues from self. And there's also regarding the scholarly productivity, like research, submitting research publication, and they feel that it's difficult to reach out for publication or to research. So who is at risk? Well, there's a lot of people. So the first in their families that achieve a success in a profession, they feel like they obtain a college degree, they feel like they have to go further. There's also the firstborn or the sibling that lives in the shadow of a family star, kind of. There's also all the extremes of parenting, of parental investments in children's success, whether it's excessive or no parental involvement at all. Then there's the woman. That's what has been described in the literature, and we will look into it, into anesthesiology later, and the minorities. So why should ES be mitigated? So it can lead to job dissatisfaction, it can lead to emotional exhaustion at work, to work-family conflicts, to burnout, to checking out of organization, to leaving the organization, to gaps in leadership, and it has also been reported to be linked to suicide. So why, if you want your organization or your institution to recognize imposter syndrome, why should they recognize it? Because it leads to loss of talented employee because they are burned out or they don't want to pursue. There is a considerable loss of many hours of monitoring, assessment, feedback if those employees leave. The resource could have been invested in a different employee, one more likely to remain. And there's also a loss of potential because the people that have imposter syndrome, they are not pursuing their career, even though they are as good as the other ones. And the other ones, they're pursuing their careers, but they have perhaps less potential. So how do we measure imposter syndrome in a cohort or a population? So the most known scale is actually the Clance imposter phenomenon scale. Clance is the one that described imposter syndrome first. So she did a scale that is 20 question with a 5-point rating scale for each question, and it's about self-assessment of competency, praise, and successes. And they have described some scores, and those have been validated in the literature. And so if you have a score of less than 40, you have few imposter syndrome characteristic. If you have a score of 41 to 60, it's moderate imposter syndrome experiences. If you have a score from 61 to 80, it's frequent imposter syndrome feelings, and more than 80 is intense imposter phenomenon experiences. The higher the score is, the more frequently imposter syndrome will interfere with your life. And just one thing that I want to add is that in the literature, it is widely accepted that a score over 61 is defined as having imposter syndrome. Okay, so I'll let Sarah go from here.
And so, thank you, Mia. So, we heard about imposter syndrome for the first time. Well, for me, it was a few years ago at an anesthesia conference. And then I started looking it up in medicine and whether it was prevalent in medicine. So what we saw is that there is not a lot of research regarding imposter syndrome in medicine. The only research that came out is quite recently, 2016, 2017, 2018. What is observed is that roughly 3 out of 4 trainees do suffer from imposter syndrome, and roughly 65% of practicing physicians have it. Now, when imposter syndrome was looked at in surgery, well, what was observed is that it was not that much related to gender when it came to surgeons, but was more related to trainees. And trainees are junior general surgeons. They tend to suffer more from imposter syndrome than senior ones. So what about imposter syndrome in anesthesia? So, well, Mia and me, we're both anesthesiologists. We started looking for that, and we saw that actually it has not been studied. So what we then did, together with another cohort of amazing women, we decided to launch a survey that was endorsed by the European Society of Anesthesiology and Intensive Care. And we really looked at, firstly, at demographics, and secondly, at imposter syndrome, so through the SIPS, the Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale, and to see whether there was a link. And what we observed, we published in the British Journal of Anesthesia, and what we observed is that, yes, there are some demographics that are linked to imposter syndrome. And as you can see here, well, on the right side, as you can see, well, it is gender related in anesthesiology, and women tend to suffer more from imposter syndrome, especially when it comes to frequent. So when you score 60 or above, or intense, that's even 80. So in those categories, female anesthesiologists tend to suffer more from imposter syndrome. Next to that, we also observed that junior physicians were also more likely to suffer from imposter syndrome. So then how, once this was established, we were quite amazed at the results, to be honest. Amazed, but at the same time not amazed, because in our group of women, we also had instances where we suffered from imposter syndrome. And so the next step was obviously looking at how to overcome imposter syndrome. And so what we then did is that, well, once we're aware of this phenomenon, it's obviously natural to go and advocate for how to overcome imposter syndrome. And then the third step is by ourselves to be an agent of change. And so what we then did is we wrote an editorial last year on International Women's Day, looking at gender equity in anesthesia. And as Mia quite nicely described the difference between gender equality and gender equity, and what we observed is that for the moment, there still are a few biases in anesthesia that are kind of making it perhaps difficult for women to reach leadership positions, to reach academic positions. And so what we observed is that, well, yes, firstly, there is a form of explicit bias. There is the motherhood penalty. So the careers and career development of women are often different than that of men. There will be a gap at a certain moment due to actually motherhood. So there needs to be some sort of flexibility. We at the moment do not have, or at least in the centers that I'm aware of, we do not have specific lactation rooms. So we always advocate for other mothers to lactate their own babies. But what about ourselves? then there is also a form of implicit bias when it comes to the social representation. At the moment, as I was saying, well, there isn't gender equality when it comes to leadership positions in anesthesia, when it comes to academic positions. And also, as you also all know, you cannot be what you can't see. And so that perhaps does create some sort of implicit bias. And then when it comes to the personal bias, well, what comes there is imposter syndrome. And so is it a personal problem? Because it's been described to be a personal problem, not really something that a medical department or an anesthesia department or society should look at. But it does come from surrounding cultural and institutional norms, and it seems to be the case cross-continental even. There are, when it comes to these stereotypes that endorse imposter syndrome, an authoritative, macho-driven leadership style, what that creates imposter syndrome. As I mentioned, there is that implicit bias, the fact that so often the head of the department, so often our professors are not that often women. And then there is obviously the burden of non-promotable work, the fact that perhaps women, we tend to say yes to a lot of things where we do not get valued for. And so the fact that imposter syndrome might be seen as a personal problem is frequently used to rationalize the persistence of gender bias. Now, what are the systemic solutions for this? Well, it's first of all to create an open dialogue, to really be able to talk about this. And that's why thank you so much, Becky, for giving us the floor to talk about this, because this kind of creates dialogue to talk about this problem. What next to that, and also needs to be accepted, is that when it comes to women and their career paths, well, nowadays, even before, it's actually a personalized form of career development, and the timeline of a woman's career will be most likely be different than that of their male counterparts. And obviously, the third thing is that we need to promote practices that can uplift women. So then we need to have a new open medical culture. So when it comes to coping mechanisms, these are actually mechanisms that were described in the literature. And what can be seen is that, well, it's really instrumental to seek social support. So that can be instrumental, emotional, through a network. Also to correct some sort of distortions, thinking that you're not good enough, kind of validating one's own successes and also of your colleagues. And then obviously staying away from maladaptive behaviors. Next to that, it's also really important to have positive affirmations, a form of self-talk that needs to be positive. And so when it comes to once again, how to overcome imposter syndrome, it's really important to first of all acknowledge one's own feelings, and know that there are many other people who have the same feelings, to build connections, and as much as possible find a sponsor, a mentor early on in one's career. Talk to a colleague or a friend about these feelings, decide to be confident, challenge your own doubts, and also remind yourself that you're good at what you do. And then next to that, it's really important to combat microaggressions. And I do want to add that, yes, we have imposter syndrome. We might have suffered from imposter syndrome, but when multiple people believe in you, it's probably time to start believing them. And this is so nice what Adam Grant said about imposter syndrome. And I kind of want to end with this quote from Michelle Obama, who also suffered from imposter syndrome, but who has also been able to overcome it. Thank you so much.
Ladies, that was absolutely incredible. And actually, my eyes are opened from a lady who would probably say she didn't have imposter syndrome. I feel seen. I had every risk factor. So, my first question is, there are several types of imposter syndrome. Can you have more than one at once?
Yes, of course you can have more than one at once. I can say from my own experience that I have more than one.
Okay, because I was like, I was listening to what you were saying, and I was like, yeah, I kind of get the expert thing, and I get the soloist thing a little bit, and I was like, I've clearly got imposter syndrome? Because I always imagined that imposter syndrome was kind of a feeling that you shouldn't be where you are. But I've kind of always said, oh, well, I kind of know how I got there, therefore I haven't got imposter syndrome. Kavita, do you have any questions?
I do. Thank you so much for your talk, both of you ladies. Excellent. I have a question because you in the research that you showed, there was a difference between anesthesiologists and surgeons because you said the imposter syndrome is not gender related in surgeons, but it is in anesthesiologists. Do you guys have any explanation for that?
That's really an interesting one, Kavita. I cannot pick it. I don't really know why that would be different because, well, first of all, we are in the same OR culture, so it is. But however, it is more prevalent in both groups. It's more prevalent in trainees. We see that in surgeons and in anesthesiologists, trainees tend to suffer more from imposter syndrome. But when we get further ahead, it's perhaps more the females anesthesiologists who are left with more imposter syndrome next to the others. Perhaps maybe in surgery, they have that mentorship program.
Or perhaps the women that pursue surgical careers are already the ones that don't have imposter feelings, because if you have it, you don't get into that kind of career. I think that, as Sarah said, we have the same OR culture, but like not really, because we are both in different professions with different tasks to do. And I think I can speak from my own experience, but I know that like the ambience at work with my colleagues is not the same that they have between surgeons. So
No,
perhaps
that's
that's an
definitely true.
explanation, but again,
That's
it's
definitely
only
true.
assumptions.
Yeah. And I also feel that in the beginning, perhaps they're, as I said, they do have mentors and sponsors.
Yeah.
So whereas we are perhaps sometimes alone in our OR.
So it's also a better, so also I think a part lack of mentorship in
Yeah.
anesthesia. Okay.
Yes, that's definitely one of the ways to overcome imposter syndrome is by mentorship and as early on as possible.
Okay. Thank you so much. I have another question. Do we still have some time?
We have time. I think we have time.
Okay. Okay. So I have this question about how do you recognize the imposter syndrome in yourself? Because I can imagine other people recognizing it in a friend or in a colleague, but for yourself, if you have imposter syndrome, you would try to rationalize your feelings, like, you know, what you guys are talking about, that you don't have the self-confidence or the mentorship or somebody to like look after you or look up to. And when you doubt yourself, it's easier, I think, for other people to see it in you than for you to see it in yourself. So are there like tools or except for the survey that you guys showed, is there some other way to make people aware that they might have imposter syndrome? Like if I see colleagues who have it, what should I do?
Well,
think,
first, yeah.
Go ahead, Mia.
I think first you have to make people aware of the fact that imposter syndrome exists. Because for me, it's like once I read something about it and I was like, okay, I have it, you know. It's not like, I think if you have it and you don't read anything and you don't know anything about it, then you cannot put a word on what you're feeling. But still, it's your feelings, so you're feeling it.
It's quite liberating. Sorry, Mia. It's quite liberating once you recognize that you have imposter syndrome and kind of also to know that there are other people who also have it, that there is a name for it, because otherwise you're just feeling you have this huge amount of self-doubt. That you know, and it can be especially in women, it can be in these very small items. But it's once you know that once you kind of recognize it, reading about it, hearing about it at conferences, well, I guess the first thing that you can do is try to look up the SIPs, so the scale. and then do it for yourself.
Yeah,
And
it
also,
might be a
raise
good
awareness.
idea. I will put a link somewhere. I will find it if women are watching this webinar and they want to do a bit of self-diagnosis. So I'll find it and put it in the YouTube link.
And
Oh, the men
maybe
can do
some
it.
men as well. Yeah.
Yeah, the men can do
Yeah.
it as
yeah,
as
that's
well.
true. That's true. But I also think that once you have it, and once you kind of think, okay, because it's not, you know, our careers are quite fluctuating. We have different challenges and different moments in our careers. So it can be a bit high, it can be lower during certain moments. But what's also quite important to see is that, okay, yes, you can have imposter syndrome, but there are obviously there are always people who believe in you. And I think the best thing is to listen to those voices that uplift you, than to your perhaps your voice of self-doubt, which is never something. Even if you talk to a friend or a colleague, you would never say these things. Why are we being so harsh to ourselves then?
Yeah.
And I would be the first person to say that changing culture is very difficult. So maybe, as you say, Sarah, it's for women to start externalizing their feelings and just remembering that we're all fabulous, and that careers for certain people are more difficult, and the exception of to accept that fact and kind of just look in the mirror and say I'm fabulous might be the way that we start to combat our imposter syndrome. I don't know.
No, it's true. And
Yes.
also perhaps encourage our colleagues.
Yeah, encourage our colleagues for sure. I think it's hard to express feelings in a culture that doesn't allow you to express them. So I think there's really a need to first recognize that imposter syndrome exists in anesthesiology, conduct more research to make people aware that it's really something and that it's really a problem. And perhaps, like, well, I'm also I did a master of sociology and anthropology, and I'm currently beginning a qualitative study on imposter syndrome in residence in my center, to understand how culture and how external stuff influence their experience of imposter syndrome and how it comes out and what are their coping mechanisms. And I think that through qualitative research, you can understand how the culture is working, and then you can make changes. I think it's really hard to go against the culture if it's already there, because I don't feel like going at work and expressing my feelings to everybody if nobody listens.
I think you'd be called sensitive, and that you were having a moment in the corner. But certainly from the work that we do, I actually think a lot of the gender equality problems that we face are probably going to be combated by women sticking together. That if we all have feelings of imposter syndrome and inadequacy and all of these challenges that we experience within our careers, perhaps it is the act of sisterhood that's going to make positive change for the future. I.e., we're all in this together, we're all thinking the same, we're all stronger together, and a lot of that kind of peer-to-peer support, mentorship, sponsorship may be the way that we will create a brighter future for women in anesthesia.
Yes,
Yes.
that's a really nice way to end, Becky.
I think it is, and I'd like to thank you all for coming and being absolutely fabulous. And I hope that you have a marvellous International Women's Day, and remember that this is your day to embrace your absolute fabulousness. So we hope that you stand in front of the mirror with the eye of the tiger on, just celebrating the fact that there are some credible women in anesthesiology all throughout the world, and that's something that we really should embrace and be proud of.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Have
you
a
very
for
much,
having
great
us.
ladies.
International Women's
Bye.
Day. Bye.
Yes, bye.